For many riders over 60, the question doesn't arrive all at once. It creeps in quietly, maybe at a stoplight when the bike suddenly feels heavier, maybe after a ride that leaves your body sore for days instead of hours. And somewhere in that silence comes the thought, how much longer can I realistically keep riding? This video isn't about quitting, it's about what actually changes after 60, what the data says, and how many riders stay on the road far longer than people expect. Because most older riders aren't looking for permission to stop. They're looking for an honest way to judge themselves before life does it for them. And that's where this conversation really begins. The hardest part is that many riders begin with the wrong question. They ask, am I too old to ride? But age alone has never defined a rider. Some lose confidence early. Others stay sharp, steady, and deeply aware well into their 70s. So this is not really about birthdays or weakness. The real fear runs deeper than that. For many longtime riders, stepping away feels too close to surrender, like losing control over a life they spent decades building on their own terms. That is why so many avoid the conversation entirely, not out of recklessness, but because they fear someone else deciding for them, a doctor, family, society. But the real question is not, when should a rider quit? It is, how do I honestly recognize when the road no longer matches my abilities? That takes humility, self-awareness, and sometimes more courage than pretending nothing has changed. Because the riders who last the longest are rarely the ones trying to prove they are still young. They are the ones willing to adapt before life forces the decision for them. And that distinction changes everything that comes next. And if this part hits close to home, hit that like button. A lot of riders are dealing with these changes quietly and honestly. The more openly people talk about it, the easier it gets to keep riding smart instead of pretending nothing's changing. Before we go any deeper, something needs to be understood clearly. This is not a conversation designed to push older riders away from motorcycles. In fact, many riders past 60 are calmer, sharper, and more disciplined than they were decades ago. Experience changes the way a person rides. Patience changes it too. The road simply demands a different relationship with the body, with awareness, and with risk itself. And pretending those changes do not exist helps nobody, but neither does fear. That is why this video is built on honesty, not judgment. Because adapting is not the same as giving up. Sometimes adaptation means shorter rides, lighter motorcycles, or choosing comfort over ego. Sometimes it means recognizing limits before pride turns them into consequences. And that distinction matters. Riders who have spent a lifetime making their own decisions deserve dignity, not lectures. They deserve truthful conversations without shame attached to them. Because riding at 70 may look different than riding at 30, but different does not automatically mean finished. In many ways, later years reveal a deeper kind of rider altogether, one shaped less by speed and more by awareness, restraint, and understanding exactly why the road still matters. But eventually, emotion alone cannot answer this question honestly. Reality has to enter the conversation too. Before that, I'm actually curious about this one. What was the first thing you noticed changing on longer rides? Night visibility? Stiffness? Fatigue? Reaction time? Leave it down in the comments. A lot of riders reading through these stories are probably going through the same thing right now and just haven't said it out loud yet. One of the biggest myths surrounding aging riders is the belief that most people simply stop riding once they reach their 60s. But the reality looks very different once you spend enough time around the motorcycle world. Across America and much of the Western riding community, the average rider has been getting older for years. And honestly, it shows. Visit a touring rally, a scenic mountain route, or a weekend motorcycle gathering, and you quickly notice something important. Riders in their 60s are everywhere. Riders in their 70s are still deeply active. Even riders in their 80s continue showing up, not recklessly, but thoughtfully, carefully, and with a completely different relationship to the road than they had decades earlier. That is the part many outsiders misunderstand. Aging does not automatically end riding. More often, it reshapes it. Experienced riders tend to adapt long before they ever consider quitting altogether. They begin avoiding heavy traffic, harsh weather, exhausting distances, and aggressive situations. Night rides become less appealing. Recovery matters more. Familiar roads replace chaotic ones. In many cases, older riders become far more selective, not less capable. And interestingly, research continues to show that mature riders are often less reckless than younger age groups. They usually ride with more patience, more awareness, and far less interest in proving something through speed or risk. That does not mean aging has no consequences. It absolutely does. Reflexes change, energy shifts, physical recovery becomes slower. But the statistics reveal something far more balanced than fear would suggest. There is no universal age where riders suddenly become too old. What usually determines longevity is not stubbornness or toughness. It is adaptation. The riders who continue the longest are often the ones most willing to evolve with reality instead of fighting it. But numbers alone cannot explain why some riders eventually choose to walk away from the road, because that decision rarely begins with statistics. It usually begins with something far more personal. What surprises many people is that most older riders do not leave motorcycling after one dramatic event. Usually, the change arrives slowly, quietly. A heavy bike starts feeling less forgiving at parking lot speeds. The knees complain more at stoplights. A long day in the saddle that once felt effortless now leaves the body exhausted afterward. Nothing catastrophic, just small reminders that the relationship between rider and machine is beginning to evolve. But physical strain is only part of the story. Sometimes the shift begins emotionally. A rider who once loved busy highways suddenly avoids crowded traffic. Night rides stop feeling peaceful and start feeling demanding. A minor close call lingers in the mind longer than it used to, and once confidence takes even a small hit, the experience of riding can change more deeply than most people realize. Because riding has always depended on trust. Trust in your reflexes, your awareness, your instincts under pressure. When that trust weakens, even slightly, the freedom can start feeling heavier than before. Then there are the quieter pressures outside the motorcycle itself. A worried spouse watching the taillight disappear down the street. Adult children beginning difficult conversations. Grandchildren changing the way risk feels emotionally. Not because the rider suddenly became fragile, but because life itself changes the meaning of responsibility over time. Health plays a role too. Vision changes. Arthritis, medication, side effects, slower recovery after injuries. Even finances can reshape things. Retirement changes priorities, and expensive motorcycles become harder to justify if they spend most of the year sitting untouched in the garage. And sometimes, the biggest reason is also the simplest. The joy changes. Not the love for motorcycles, but the feeling itself. What once brought peace begins bringing tension instead. The ride becomes mentally draining rather than restorative. And when that happens, some riders quietly step back, not out of defeat, but out of honesty. But here's what many people fail to understand. Stepping away from riding does not always mean losing identity. Many riders stay connected through smaller bikes, restoration projects, mentorship, or the community itself, which reveals something important. Aging riders are often misunderstood entirely, especially when it comes to safety on the road. One of the biggest lies people believe about aging riders is that growing older automatically makes you unsafe on a motorcycle. Like somehow, the moment a rider crosses 60, skill disappears, judgment collapses, and fear takes over the handlebars. But real life does not work that way. In fact, for many riders, the opposite quietly starts happening, because after decades on two wheels, something changes inside you. The urge to impress fades. The need to prove yourself burns out. You stop treating every stretch of pavement like a challenge to conquer and start treating it like something to understand. Experience humbles you. And strangely enough, that humility often makes older riders far safer than people expect. Seasoned riders rarely gamble the way younger riders do. They do not charge blindly into traffic. They do not chase reckless speed just to feel alive for a few seconds. They have already seen what overconfidence can destroy, maybe firsthand, maybe through friends who never made it home. Either way, the lesson stays with them. So instead of relying purely on reflexes, mature riders lean on something deeper: anticipation. They study intersections earlier. They notice distracted drivers quicker. They sense tension in traffic before chaos fully develops. That kind of instinct cannot be taught overnight. It is carved slowly through years of close calls, bad weather, long miles, and hard-earned lessons. But aging still changes the equation. Not always through dramatic crashes, but through smaller moments. A heavy motorcycle leaning just a little too far at a gas station. Loose gravel beneath a boot at walking speed. An awkward uphill parking spot that suddenly feels twice as demanding as it did 10 years ago. Those are the moments that begin testing older riders most. And maybe that is the real truth nobody talks about. Growing older does not automatically make you reckless or incapable. It simply forces honesty. The smartest riders are not the ones pretending nothing has changed. They are the ones adapting before pride turns small limitations into permanent consequences. Because eventually, every rider notices it. The body starts whispering things the mind still wants to ignore. And that quiet conversation becomes impossible to outrun forever. If you've had one of those conversations with your wife, husband, kids, or even close friends about whether you should still be riding, share your experience in the comments. Those talks are becoming part of riding for a lot of people over 60, and everybody seems to handle them a little differently. One of the earliest changes many riders notice after 60 is not weakness. It is timing, not some dramatic collapse in ability, not suddenly becoming incapable overnight. It is subtler than that, a quiet realization that the space between seeing something and reacting to it feels just a little wider than it once did. Maybe a car pulls out unexpectedly and your hands take a fraction longer to reach the brakes. Maybe dense traffic feels more mentally exhausting than it used to. Maybe a sudden merge or fast lane change demands more concentration to sort through clearly. Most riders recognize these moments privately long before they ever admit them out loud. And the truth is, some slowing is completely normal. The brain changes with age, just like the body does. Mental processing becomes slightly less automatic under stress, fatigue, poor weather, heavy traffic, or long hours in the saddle. At highway speeds, even small delays matter because motorcycles leave very little forgiveness between control and catastrophe. But this is where experience changes everything. Older riders often compensate in ways they barely even realize. They create larger following gaps naturally. They stop riding aggressively just to keep pace with impatient traffic. They position themselves smarter inside the lane. They avoid chaos when possible. They choose calmer routes, ride earlier in the day, and take breaks before exhaustion starts clouding judgment. That is not decline. That is adaptation. And adaptation is exactly why many riders continue safely for decades after first noticing physical changes. Because younger riders may react faster physically while still making terrible decisions under pressure. Experienced riders rely on something deeper than reflexes alone: anticipation. They recognize danger before it fully appears. A drifting driver, a distracted glance through a windshield, a vehicle waiting to turn with wheels already pointed into traffic. Years in the saddle sharpen that awareness into instinct. Still, honesty matters here too. There's a difference between manageable slowing and serious impairment. Occasional stiffness or needing more focus is one thing. Consistently missing hazards, feeling overwhelmed in ordinary traffic, or struggling to process fast-moving situations is something else entirely. And deep down, most mature riders know the difference. Because eventually, riding stops being about proving you still can. It becomes about understanding exactly how to continue safely without lying to yourself. And for many riders, the next challenge does not begin with slower hands at all. It begins much earlier with what the eyes quietly stop seeing as clearly as before. Not sudden blindness, not waking up unable to ride. It happens gradually, almost invisibly at first. The road simply begins demanding more concentration than it used to. Motorcycling asks an enormous amount from the eyes. You are constantly scanning mirrors, reading traffic behavior, judging distance, tracking movement, spotting debris, and interpreting road conditions in real time. And over the years, that non-stop processing slowly becomes more demanding. Night riding is usually where many riders notice it first. Headlights feel harsher than they once did. Glare from oncoming traffic lingers longer. Wet pavement starts reflecting light in ways that make the road harder to read clearly. Dark corners feel less predictable. Even familiar roads can suddenly seem more mentally tiring after sunset. And interestingly, many experienced riders adapt before they ever fully admit these changes to themselves. They begin leaving earlier in the day. They plan routes that get them home before dark. They avoid unfamiliar back roads at night or skip riding altogether when heavy rain reduces visibility. Not because fear controls them, but because experience teaches them what no longer feels worth forcing. That is not weakness. That is judgment. Peripheral awareness can shift too. A rider may still see sharply ahead while becoming slower at noticing movement entering from the edges of vision. Small things become easier to miss. A car creeping from a side street, loose gravel near a corner, uneven pavement hidden beneath shadows. But this is where mature riders often make one of their smartest decisions. They adapt instead of pretending nothing changed. Some switch to daylight, riding almost exclusively. Others invest in anti-glare shields, brighter lighting, or more frequent eye exams. And surprisingly, those adjustments often restore confidence instead of diminishing it. Because confidence built on honesty lasts far longer than confidence built on denial. And eventually, many riders discover the next challenge has nothing to do with seeing the motorcycle at all. It begins the moment the machine starts feeling heavier, slower to manage, and less forgiving during the low-speed moments where balance quietly becomes everything. Because for riders past 60, the hardest adjustment is not accepting that motorcycles have limits. It is realizing the body does too. And usually, those changes do not arrive like a lightning strike. They creep in quietly through ordinary moments. Riders barely notice at first, a knee trembling slightly while holding a heavy bike at a long stoplight, a stiff hip making the saddle feel taller every morning, a shoulder tightening after an hour against highway wind, a neck that no longer turns easily enough to check traffic without rotating the entire torso. Most riders never announce these struggles out loud. They simply adapt in silence. They start choosing parking spots carefully so they never have to back uphill. They avoid uneven gas stations. They skip crowded downtown traffic. They ride shorter distances. They stop before exhaustion fully sets in. Not because they are fragile, but because experience teaches them how quickly small physical limitations can become dangerous on two wheels. And strangely enough, many riders discover the interstate still feels manageable, while parking lots become the real challenge. Slow speed balance demands strength, coordination, and flexibility in ways highway cruising never does. Tight U-turns suddenly require concentration. Holding up a fully loaded touring motorcycle on uneven pavement starts feeling less predictable than it once did. Then comes the subject many riders quietly avoid altogether: medication. Not because it is embarrassing, because it forces honesty. Certain pain medications, sleep aids, blood pressure, prescriptions, and anti-anxiety drugs can subtly affect alertness, balance, coordination, or focus. Sometimes the rider does not even recognize the change immediately, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous. But adaptation can extend riding life dramatically. Lighter motorcycles help. Lower seat heights help. Stretching, strength work, shorter riding days, and smarter route choices all make a difference. Many riders continue safely for years because they adapt early instead of stubbornly pretending nothing changed. Because real wisdom after 60 is not ignoring limitations. It is recognizing them before they begin controlling the outcome. And once riders accept that truth, something surprising happens next. The motorcycle itself starts evolving too. Not toward more power or ego, but towards something far more valuable now: control, confidence, and ease. Because motorcycles are never just transportation. Not to riders who spent decades building memories around them. The big touring rig, the heavyweight cruiser, the massive engine that once felt powerful, commanding, almost inseparable from identity itself. And stepping away from that image can feel deeply personal, like leaving behind a version of yourself you are not fully ready to say goodbye to. But this is where many experienced riders discover something surprising. Choosing a lighter motorcycle is not always surrender. Sometimes it is the exact reason riding remains possible. A machine that weighs 50 or 100 pounds less changes everything riders feel at low speed. Parking lots become less stressful. Gravel stops feel more manageable. Backing into a driveway no longer feels like wrestling gravity itself. Even holding the bike upright at a long stoplight demands less energy from aging knees and hips. And slowly, something important returns: ease. Because once a rider starts fearing the weight of the motorcycle itself, every ride becomes mentally heavier too. Hesitation creeps in. Confidence tightens up. Simple situations begin feeling unpredictable. But a lighter, more balanced machine often restores relaxation, and relaxed riders make smoother decisions than tense riders ever will. That is why so many longtime motorcyclists eventually shift toward motorcycles built around comfort, balance, and control instead of brute force. A bike like the Honda Rebel 1100, for example, delivers strong torques with a lower center of gravity that feels far less intimidating during slow-speed maneuvering. Others move toward middleweight, adventure bikes, or smaller touring machines that reduce fatigue without sacrificing freedom. Because after 60, performance starts meaning something different. Not top speed, not ego, not proving toughness. Performance becomes confidence after 4 hours in the saddle, precision in traffic, stability during awkward stops, energy left at the end of the ride instead of exhaustion. And for many riders, that shift becomes the very thing that keeps the journey alive. Because eventually, wisdom stops asking, "How much motorcycle can I handle?" and starts asking something far smarter: what motorcycle allows me to keep riding longest? And so far, we've talked about reaction time, vision, bike setup, family pressure, All the stuff riders usually avoid talking about until it becomes impossible to ignore. So let me ask you this. What change helped you stay comfortable riding the longest? Leave it in the comments. And if you're enjoying the video, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel keep making videos like this. Somewhere after 60, many riders begin realizing something difficult. Riding is not becoming exhausting because the love for motorcycles disappeared. It's becoming exhausting because the body no longer absorbs strain the way it once did. And that changes how you see technology. For years, a lot of riders believed comfort features and rider aids somehow weakened the experience. Like struggling through heavy traffic, fighting a stiff clutch, or ignoring wrist pain proved you were still a real rider. But age teaches a different lesson. Unnecessary struggle is not skill. And for many older riders, modern technology quietly becomes the reason they can continue riding comfortably for years longer than they expected. One of the biggest examples is DCT and automatic transmissions. Riders dealing with arthritis, knee pain, stiff fingers, or reduced grip strength often discover that constant clutch work drains energy slowly and silently, not all at once. The fatigue builds mile after mile until concentration starts fading and traffic suddenly feels overwhelming. Then they try a smoother transmission system and everything changes. Stop and go, traffic becomes calmer. Low speed, maneuvering feels less stressful. The motorcycle starts feeling manageable again instead of demanding. And most importantly, mental focus stays sharper. Because safe riding after 60 becomes less about aggression and more about awareness. Every bit of unnecessary physical strain steals attention, away from judgment, reaction time, and road awareness. Reducing workload is not weakness, it is intelligent adaptation. The same thing applies to smaller upgrades. Many seasoned riders now swear by. Throttle assists reduce wrist fatigue. Ergonomic grips soften vibration. Extended levers help stiff hands maintain smoother control. Better seats reduce lower back and hip pain during longer rides. None of these changes seem dramatic alone, but together they can completely transform the experience. Because eventually, the goal stops being proving you can wrestle a motorcycle the hard way. The goal becomes preserving the freedom to keep riding tomorrow. And naturally, that leads to the next truth. Every long-term rider eventually faces protection. There's a major shift that happens somewhere later in life, and most riders don't notice it immediately. When you're younger, confidence often comes from feeling invincible. But after 60, confidence begins coming from something far more valuable: preparation. Because experienced riders eventually understand a truth that takes decades to fully appreciate. The goal is in not proving you can survive danger. The goal is reducing the consequences when life suddenly goes sideways. And that mindset changes everything about how you approach gear, training, and safety. At 30, a crash might leave you bruised, sore, frustrated for a few weeks. At 65, that same impact can mean broken ribs, surgery, months of rehabilitation, or losing mobility that never fully returns. That's why modern protective equipment matters so much more than many riders want to admit. And nothing represents that evolution more clearly than airbag vests. A lot of riders resisted them at first. They looked excessive, complicated, maybe even unnecessary, until people started realizing what they actually do. Modern systems can detect violent separation from the motorcycle and inflate in fractions of a second, protecting the chest, spine, shoulders, ribs, and neck before major impact occurs. And for older riders, that protection can be life-changing. Not because aging makes you weak, because healing becomes harder. The same truth applies to modern helmets, armor jackets, gloves, and riding boots. Today's equipment is lighter, quieter, more comfortable, and dramatically more protective than what many riders grew up wearing decades ago. But gear is only part of the equation. Some of the smartest riders over 60 eventually return to advanced riding courses and refresher training. Not because they forgot how to ride, but because traffic changes, motorcycles evolve, and old habits deserve reevaluation. And surprisingly, many riders discover those courses restore more than skill. They restore trust in yourself. Because wisdom on two wheels is not pretending risk disappears. It's respecting danger enough to prepare for it properly. But sometimes the hardest pressure older riders face doesn't come from the road at all. Sometimes it's waiting at home. For many riders over 60, the hardest change is not physical at all. It is watching the people closest to them begin seeing the motorcycle through fear instead of freedom. A spouse who once enjoyed the sound of the engine now watches the forecast with concern. Adult children who once admired that independence start asking questions that feel heavier than they sound. Are you sure you should still be riding? Is it still safe? Even when it comes from love, it can still feel like loss. Because for lifelong riders, the motorcycle is not just a hobby. It is identity, confidence, and personal freedom. So those questions often land as something deeper. That independence might be fading. But family concern is usually not control. It is fear, a close call, slower movement, fatigue that others notice more than the rider admits. And this is where things get complicated. Nobody is fully wrong. One side wants freedom, the other wants safety. The riders who handle this best stop arguing and start showing responsibility instead. Safer habits, smarter choices, better gear, honest adjustments. Because reassurance does not come from defending yourself. It comes from how you ride. And when responsibility becomes visible, fear slowly shifts into trust. Not because concern disappears, but because confidence returns on both sides. And often, riders realize something unexpected. Compromise does not always take freedom away. Sometimes it is what keeps it alive. And quietly, that realization opens the door to the most important chapter of all, what riding truly means, once age, ego, and identity finally collide. And if you want to support even more long-form motorcycle stories like this, the kind most channels are afraid to talk about, become a member for early access to future videos and deeper rides into the realities of motorcycle life. At some point, almost every rider discovers this conversation was never only about motorcycles. Beneath all the questions about balance, reaction time, vision, or strength, something much deeper has always been hiding there. Identity. Because for many riders over 60, motorcycles were never just machines. They were independence with an engine attached, a way to disappear from stress for a while, a place where the noise of life finally became quiet enough to breathe again. And that connection does not simply vanish because the years begin changing the body. If anything, it often becomes more meaningful, but it changes shape. After enough miles, riding slowly stops. Being about proving toughness, the obsession with speed fades, the ego softens. The endless need to push harder begins losing its grip. And in its place comes something far calmer. Intention. A peaceful morning ride matters more than crossing 3 states in a single day. Empty back roads feel richer than crowded highways. Comfort starts winning over image. Riders choose machines that support them instead of challenging them constantly. Not because passion disappeared, but because experience finally taught them what truly matters. And many riders never fully quit the dramatic way younger people imagine. Instead, they gradually reshape the relationship. The rides become shorter, more selective, more personal. And strangely enough, many say the experience becomes deeper than it was decades earlier. Because when time feels finite, attention sharpens. The sound of the engine matters more. The sunrise matters more. Even the simple ability to throw a leg over a motorcycle. It all begins feeling like a privilege instead of a guarantee. And for some riders, eventually stepping away deserves just as much respect too. Because making that choice, honestly, before pride makes it for you, may be the final act of wisdom motorcycling teaches. Because in the end, the greatest riders are not the ones who fought aging forever. They are the ones who adapted without losing the part of themselves that first fell in love with the ride. And the next video on your screen goes even deeper into the reality of motorcycle life. The parts people usually don't talk about until they've been riding a very long time. So click into the next ride, subscribe if you haven't already, and before you head out, don't forget to like the video.